Welcome to the Troy Kearns podcast. We talk all things real estate, business, and investing, entrepreneurship, and sometimes we go down to the freaking rabbit hole. And I just had the pleasure of meeting probably one of the coolest dudes I've met in a while. His name is Chad Zdenek, and if I butchered that name, he's going to correct me in just a second. But Chad, I met at the Real Estate Guys conference, and he's probably one of the guys that I really identified the most with. He's from California. We talked a little bit about that. Chad, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Troy. Good to be on, buddy.
Did I say your name correctly?
You nailed it.
All right, awesome. And you're from CSQ Properties. You're an investor, a real estate, a scientist. Tell us about who you are, what you do, and kind of where you're at in your career.
Cool. Yeah, I've had a varied background. So I started out in construction, got my license as a general contractor, went to school for civil engineering and structural engineering, got my professional engineer's license in that. And actually started out in aerospace of all things, working on the space shuttle main engines, and got out of construction, but still stayed in the structural engineering world. And then started a business with my brother, which he eventually took over a few years ago. And just before that, before he took over, I started getting more into real estate and as an investor. And then once he took over the business, I went into real estate full time and never looked back. And that's what I do now. I do mostly multifamily syndications here in Long Beach, which is in LA. And then also out of state. So kind of all over the place, but I love real estate. So happy to talk to you about it.
And I appreciate that. Yeah. And we were both at a conference where we had a good time and we got to know each other. And I really appreciate, that we developed that relationship. I think that we'll probably do something together down the road. One of the things that I'm sad I missed, and I do want to take a look at, is you had a show recently featured about you on it's called Monster Machines. Can you break that down for me exactly what it was?
Sure. Yeah, we did a show. I'm a TV host. That's kind of my side hustle. So I do real estate instead of waiting tables, but yeah, I do some TV hosting work. And the last show I did was called Inside Mighty Machines. And it was airing on Smithsonian Channel and National Geographic. You can see it on Amazon or Hulu now. And it was a 6-part series where we basically dove into these giant machines and took them apart and figured out how they worked, figure out some of the history behind it. I talked to a lot of designers and builders, and it was a pretty cool show. We had a lot of fun. It was done all over the world, and I think you'll like it. It was pretty good.
When I looked at you, when I first met you, I was like, this guy looks like he's from California. I think guys, if somebody's going to look at you okay, blonde hair, blue eyes. When we got to talk a little bit on a personal level, one of the things that I asked you, I was like, why do you stay in California? And I would like to ask you that question right now. I just literally shot a video of why you should leave California. And nice. You told me you're a 4th generation, I believe, Californian.
Third,
my bad. And tell me about and just prior to the show, you mentioned that you still invest in California, even though you invest out of state, and that a lot of people that live in California don't even invest there. Can you talk about why you love California still and why you're still staying there in spite of all the, adversity that you face there?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's a lot to unpack in that question. I like to tell people that if you can put up with the politics and the traffic, that California is a great place to live. And it is getting a lot more difficult to stay here for those 2 reasons. It really is. It's very expensive. Excuse me. I've actually got 5 kids. 3 of them are in private school, and a stay-at-home wife who kind of manages everything. And it's very expensive to live here. It's pretty tough, actually. And believe it or not, in the last 3 years, I've had 35 family members move out of California. Right. So I'm almost,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot, and I'm kind of like the last of the Mohicans here. There's a few more of us still here, but it's tough. But for me, the weather is amazing, and there's a lot of outdoor stuff to do. I'm a big outdoors guy. I love mountain biking, hiking. There's lots of good mountains and trails and the beach, and I can go snowboarding, 2 hours away. So, I mean, you have all that, which is still here, and that's a big pull for people. So for now, I'm here, although I will tell you it's getting more difficult to stay. In terms of investing, the investing is doing really great. I mean, I talk about how hard it is to build in LA and all the regulation and costs. Like, that makes all the existing inventory just keep going up and up and up. And I don't know why they can't figure out why there's an affordability issue here. And I'll tell you, it's because of all the regulation that they have and the permits that take forever to get. They're super expensive. Your carrying costs go through the roof. And there's no more land to really expand, because we're bounded by all the mountains, San Gabriel Mountains, the valley, the ocean. There's not really a whole lot more that you can do, like a suburban sprawl type of growth. And
Right.
that is making the equity, go through the roof. Cash flow is not as good typically, but your equity is still very strong. Equity growth is still very strong.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I remember I was looking for some deals in Santa Barbara. My dad really wanted to retire there, and so I started looking into it a few years ago. And I'm like, yeah, well, how's the cash flow on this deal? He's like, well, we're not talking about cash flow here in California. We're talking about future equity. And I'm like, what? Future equity? Like, you're selling that, like the dream? And I think it's a really good time in this conversation for us to take a step back and say, because you told us you're a civil engineer, which for anybody who's paying attention out there, that's like a really hard degree. You got to be a super smart guy to get that degree. And I'm not trying to patronize you by saying that. I'm just saying that and if you're doing all these big things, and you're obviously a smart guy. What kind of red tape? I just literally got off a stop work order today. What kind of red tape as a contractor do you have to go through in California to get a permit?
Oh, it's brutal. I'll tell you that, and I will just say one thing on the cash flow type thing. That we do value add deals, and if you can find a good value add deal, you can still create cash flow in Southern California, and that's what I do. But we can expand on that later if you'd like to. I just wanted to point out that you can do cash flow in Southern California. Going back to the red tape, it's a disaster. I mean, it's unbelievable. I got a project that, I mean, listen, you're going to laugh at this, right? I've got a project. It's a medical building in the San Fernando Valley, 10 units. And it was built in 1952 by my grandpa, of all people. My dad bought it from my grandpa. I bought it from my dad. And the parking lot is like flat. It's got like 50 parking spots in it. And I had to pull a permit to redo the parking lot. I'm trying to add some drainage to it, some sump pumps, and finally get it to drain correctly. And I've been working on this for over a year to get a permit just to redo the parking lot. And like, if you looked at it, it's a total disaster. There's cracks everywhere. It's wavy. It doesn't drain. I get like 4 to 5 inches of water on a good rain, standing water. And I'm over a year in on this trying to get it done. And sorry if it's going long, but I'm really fired up about this.
Yeah, I think it's important. Yeah.
So listen to this. I'm going to walk you through this, right? You submit the plans. I hire an engineer, a grading engineer, right? I'm a structural guy, so I do ground up, structure stuff. I hire a flat guy, grading engineer, and so we get the plans, submit it, and they say, okay, but you don't have enough your parking spots need to be bigger because of the new code. Okay, we'll do bigger parking spots. We submit it with bigger parking spots. And they say, oh, your building is too big. You need more parking spots. And we're like, well, you told us to make the parking spots bigger. So it made less parking spots. They're like, well, we can't give you a permit because now there's not enough parking if you comply with today's code. And I'm like, yeah, what am I supposed to do? They're like, well, you need to go hire a parking analysis expert and have them do a parking study and then submit that. So, okay, spend another $5,000, get the parking analysis done, which is like a floor area ratio type stuff. Do that, and then they still don't accept it. So now I'm just still banging my head against the wall. I'm just trying to repave a parking lot. I'm over a year in. I'm probably 20 grand in on consulting fees for all these different people to hire, and I still don't have an approved permit just to do my asphalt.
So a big question that I would have, and I talked about this in my video earlier today, was like, I said the main reason people that don't pull permits is because like literally my guy didn't pull a permit. He pissed off the neighbor. We got a stop work order, and then I went through the red tape, and literally until I pulled the favor in, right, until I contacted the person that I knew, I tried to go take the regular steps like you're taking right now, and it took. And I don't know if there's an end in sight, just like you're talking about. So my question to you is, why would you even pull a permit on something like that?
Yeah, and truth be told, I probably wouldn't if I was just repaving, have it done on a 3-day weekend and knock it out. The problem is all the subterranean stuff I got to do for drainage and pumps is going to take a long time to do all that stuff. And we're talking about it's a 50 spot parking. It's a big area. So it would at best case would take a couple weeks to get it done. And there's no way that I wouldn't get nailed, and I'd get the stop order on my deal. And then that's a disaster. Like and I've had that on my projects, I've had stop orders, and that's when they really put you through the ringer. You get the fees, extra fees, the multiples they add on that, at least over here they do. And then you got a pissed off inspector that's going to nitpick everything till the end of the project. And it makes it very difficult.
Right. You try to play by the rules. You end up having to go through this circus, is what I would call it, for lack of a better word. It's just a bunch of power tripping bureaucrats who love telling you no. Oh, you didn't get this done? Oh, you didn't get, and nobody talks to each other. Right. No. Nobody has one clue of what they're doing or anything like that. And everybody's answer is no, we don't know what's going on. No, we don't know how to do that. No, we don't know how to do this. And go get this report. Go pay for this guy. Go pay for this guy.
Yeah.
Totally hear you there. That's totally frustrating.
And you're the guy that's trying to improve things, and somehow they make you to be the bad guy. And all you're trying to do is improve a property or make something better and do good for the community. And they demonize you and put you through the ringer. What state was that stop order in?
So that's funny. This is in Kansas City, Missouri, and I literally bought it, and the whole neighborhood's behind me. They're like, go. You know what I mean? Like, because this property's been sitting there for 30 years, empty. There's a lot of abandoned housing stock out here in Kansas City, and this is one that I bought for a great deal. And literally, now just people ripping stuff out. People taking stuff. Now it's at what point in time is the city responsible for me? And that's what happened is eventually I went through that process of 4 months of a fourplex. And literally, here's what you'll appreciate this as somebody who's been through this. So I called him up. I'm like, all right, so I got my buddy who's a licensed contractor, go pull the permit. I wasn't licensed at the time. And to tell you how much time has transpired, I'm now licensed. So I go, I do the whole deal, and we go through them, and then they just keep kicking stuff back, because they had changed the zoning of this fourplex. So since they changed the zoning of the fourplex, they're like, you need to go and get non-conforming use. I'm like, okay, what do I have to do for that? They're like, you got to go to the library and go to the Polk phone directory and prove that this property was built as a fourplex. I'm like, I go, okay, let's say I do that. Then what's the next step? And they go, and then we do an inspection. I go, can't you just do an inspection right now and see that it was built? Or can't you do? So I do all of these things like you're talking about. So finally, I'm getting nowhere fast. I'm doing everything that they're saying. We've got we've submitted everything. We've got a concierge at the city. We're getting nowhere. Finally, I throw my hands up in the air, and I'm literally getting ready to buy a 5.6 million building downtown, 78,000 square foot on 10th and Main. And I wrote the city manager, who I have a relationship with. I got to know him at several functions that I was invited to by people that he knows that, hey, this guy's doing crap, right? And so I emailed him directly. I said, if I'm going to move forward on this big project, I'm very hesitant, knowing that I can't even get a freaking fourplex in the rough area of Kansas City off the freaking ground. And I'm taking responsibility. Like, I know my guy should have pulled a permit here. I get that. We're past it. We'll pay the fines. We'll pay the penalties, but we can't get going unless you're willing to let us get going. Like, now that I'm caught red-handed, then we're definitely following the protocol. But if we can't even get in the game, then how are we supposed to get going? So it's totally frustrating.
Brutal.
So I see the American flag back there. You put that up there for a reason. Can you tell me what that reason was?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big diehard patriot. I still love America. Called me old school. You know, some
Right.
people are
Me too.
turned off by that, but for me, it's what I stand for. And I'll tell you that what's kind of interesting. And you mentioned Belize earlier on. That you and I were both there where we first met. 8-day investor summit, not just real estate, but just investments. And one of the themes that I find ringing true amongst the circles of the wealthy are wealth doesn't mean a whole lot if you don't have your freedom, right? And you can have all the money in the world, and if you don't have your freedom, it doesn't mean anything. And like one of the examples they brought up was like the I think it was the one of the founders of Alibaba in China that was
Jack Ma.
talking, yeah, talking bad, right? And they put him away he disappeared for 2 years, and the guy
Right.
was a billionaire. So it's I think it's really important that we remember that freedom isn't free, that we stand for our liberties, we fight for it, and don't take it for granted. And for me, the American flag represents all that, and that's something I fight for.
Right. And I totally appreciate you saying that because that's something that I believe in. And it's, yeah, it's like, oh, getting ahead is the whole vernacular of people these days have changed. Like the minute that you're doing something to get ahead, you're all of a sudden the enemy, right? Versus
Yeah.
like we should all be celebrating each other's success and competing with each other to succeed. And that's what makes us a great country, right? When we're competing, the Olympics is something that talks about that. You know, when you're competing against other countries to be the best country. I don't know. I think we're similar in age. And I know you would probably remember this when 9/11 happened, right? That was probably the most patriotic that I've ever felt in this country. Everybody was rolling around with American flags on their cars. You know, we just
Yeah.
saw like 5,000 of the Americans who had died in this horrible accident, and that was the most patriotic I'd ever seen in the country. And
Yeah.
post that, I really don't see a lot of people, celebrating. It's almost they're afraid to say something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame. It's no longer, what can you do for your, or what can you do for your country, not what can your country do for you. And now I think there's so many takers and entitled people out there that are just asking, what can my country do for you? And the people that are actually contributing is a shrinking number, and I think that's going to create a lot of issues in the future.
So how does Chad, the father, deal with these things? You know what I mean? Raising your children in California, raising your children with the conversation of like, it's okay to be an American. It's okay to be a patriot. It's okay to say that stuff. How do you deal with that with 4 children?
Yeah. So actually I have five. I got four daughters
My
and
bad.
one son. Um, and it's a constant battle. I think part of it is, for me, I had to take them out of public school. We're LAUSD. You've probably heard about that school district is a disaster. And so I put them in private school, which is really, really difficult for me to do financially. Just, it's like I said, it's expensive to live here, but to me that's like almost priority number one. I gotta get them into a private school, and that's part of the battle. But the other part of the battle is raising them, I think, with American values. Like literally every time we drive by down the 405 freeway, the main freeway down here, we pass the veterans cemetery. All radios go off, all phones go away. We have, it's either 20 seconds of silence, or it could be 15 minutes, depending on traffic, of silence where we thank the veterans for our freedom. And
Wow.
I've done that. I'll tell you, I've probably done that 2,000 times now. And even my teenage daughters, they know that the phones go away, and that's priority number one, is that we say thank you for our freedom. I also have them watch, videos from people that I admire, that I think are speaking the truth, and I have them watch those videos and just kind of learn what they wouldn't normally be learning, certainly from their friends, even from school. Sometimes they don't learn that, and all the like Memorial Day holidays. We take time to really thank our veterans. We watch memorial type videos about them, and I'm constantly putting it in their mind that what we have today isn't necessarily always going to be this way. Ronald Reagan said we're only one generation away from losing our freedom. I tell my
Right.
kids that all the time, and I say, hey, I'm going to be gone, but it's going to be up to you guys to start, to carry on this legacy. And I try to just pound it into them all the time. And
Right.
and respecting the military is a big part of that. Respecting the founding fathers, the Constitution, and American, traditional American values is a big part of that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I've got twins, and it's something that, me and my son got into actually last night. He said something inappropriate, and I'm just like, man, you got to be a leader. You know what I mean? You can't be like everybody else who's a follower. And because
Yeah.
we're a herd, humans are a herd community, as and so sometimes belonging is one of the reasons that people won't do something, right? And I'm like, just because you want to belong or feel cool, you got to be an outsider a little bit these days to be a patriot. And
Yeah.
I think that's cool that you're training your kids that way. I do this, I don't do the same thing. I'm picking up some of those cool habits. Like I've certainly taken them to the Veterans Cemetery in San Francisco and in other places in Leavenworth, Kansas, out here. I think that's
Yeah.
cool that you do a moment of silence. Like after 2,000 times, they're probably going to get it in their head that it's pretty important,
It's a
right?
lot. Dude, it's crazy. I was literally, for the 4th of July, we were driving down there, and it was my 5-year-old in the back seat who said, "Hey, the veterans are coming up, turn off the radio," like before we got there. My 5-year-old said that. I'm like, wow, I think it does sink in. And the other thing I do too, and you can probably appreciate this, especially listening to George Gammon, is I really push on them the idea of capitalism, and they don't get any allowance. They have to earn the money they make. I buy the basic stuff. Like literally, we'll go out to dinner and I buy the chicken level pricing stuff. If they want the fancier meal, the lobster, they pay the difference. And they do. They really want the lobster. And my one daughter, she loves it, and so she'll pay the difference, and she knows it. We went out for like 4th of July, and they wanted to dress up with all this stuff. And I said, look, we already have stuff at home, but if you want to buy more, I'll take you, but you got to use your own money. And so they do. So they really know the importance of money. I only buy something once. If you lose it or you break it, you buy it the second time. And so I stick to that. And it's amazing how responsible they get if you kind of lead them the right way.
That's great. That's great information. I totally agree with you. I do a lot of those same things myself. I think a lot of the guys I know, just like you, do the exact same things. I want to get into your investment properties, but I did want to take one step because you just mentioned something that probably was one of the best things that I took away from that seminar was George Gammon's story of him hiking up in the mountains. Do you remember
Yeah.
that?
Oh yeah.
And I think that is like a mental shift, right? Like, I don't know if we got the whole story. Like, in my opinion, I don't know if we got the whole story, if we got some of the story, what the situation was, but it was definitely like that story of this guy hiking and almost dying and hanging on, and then realizing that his life, he got a second chance at life. And that second chance is like for him to be able to make a big difference. And sometimes people just need to realize that, like, and the thing I talk about a lot of times, and I think you'll appreciate this, like, I'm not mad at all the people flocking in here to try to make a better go at life. I'm mad at the people who are here that aren't trying to make a better go at life. Like in terms of immigrants coming to our country to try to make a better for themselves. I'm mad at the people who are here that don't realize how great they have it.
Yeah.
So,
I agree.
So what did you think about, what did you get that takeaway from that George Gammon speech?
I think a big part of it is perspective, right? I mean, he, without going into the details that he might not want us to share, but he went up there to try to think about some things, and when he got caught in that situation, it really changed his perspective. And I think like 9/11, that was a perspective changing issue, right? And you saw it changed the perspective of a lot of people. George Gammon, when he was hiking through those mountains, that was a perspective changing situation for him. So I think during different times in our lives, we come across something, or we find ourselves in a situation, or something happens to us. Cancer is a big one, where it really does change your perspective on things. And it's almost like the man upstairs, giving you a slap in the face, and like a wake up call, like, hey, you got to really start focusing on what's really important, because the stuff that you've been bitching about for years, like in the big scheme, that's not a big deal. And now you kind of wake up to that. So I think that's kind of an epiphany that George Gammon went through.
Right.
I know I've had similar things happen, but not to that extent.
Right.
And I think 9/11 is probably a good example of it happening to all of us.
That's great. Yeah, I when I quit drinking, that was kind of my big thing in 2007. I stopped drinking, and it was because of that perspective shift of watching. I'm like, man, how many people who are successful actually sleep in their car and continue to do these bad habits like that I'm continuing to do? And not saying that alcohol is bad for everybody, but it was definitely bad for me. Can you talk about what CSQ Properties is and kind of what your guys' mission is?
So for us, we're trying to create freedom through passive income, and we do primarily syndications in the multifamily and self-storage space. And so basically, syndication is pooling a bunch of investors together to buy a big property that they normally wouldn't be able to do on their own. And you can get some good industrial quality, good risk adjusted return type properties when you pool it together. And for me, and my background, I'm usually the lead GP on it. I've got a good background for doing that stuff. So
Right.
when I started in real estate, I was just doing it on my own. And you talk about, like, if you're doing something good, like, you should spread the word and don't be selfish about it. Try to help others, right? And so part of that mission is helping others to find their own freedom through passive income. And for me, I'm deliberate about not calling it financial freedom, because again, the freedom is more to me than just financially free. But certainly that's a part of it. But freedom is what I try to bring to other people.
So I wanted to kind of clarify a few things for people who don't know what they are. You mentioned the word GP, and a lot of people who are listening to this show are brand new to investing. Can you break down what a GP stands for, and what it is, and what actually a syndication is? I know you kind of talked about it a little bit, but if you could really expand on those two things and what LPs are and how those things work together and how that whole deal, because I've never done a syndication deal. I've been a part of a syndication deal because I invested in a bridge in Kansas City here. But I think it's something that a lot of people, when you're talking about, investing in real estate, a lot of people who get started and having a massive amount of success don't start like you and I did by doing everything on their own. They start in this arena, and this is the arena that they know. But then a lot of people that have never heard of this don't even know what it is.
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited that you invested in a bridge. I just designed tons of bridges. Like, I've done a lot of bridge work. I've never met somebody who invested in a bridge. That's pretty cool.
There's actually, yeah. So just to kind of talk about that a little bit, because I invested in the person and not the project, right? And I think that's a lot of what syndication is. The project obviously spells out the details, but this is a guy whose name is Michael Zeller, and he has another partner named Mike. And I got introduced to them when I first moved to Kansas City, and they had this wild idea of taking an 1800s bridge that had been abandoned, leasing it back from the state at like $6 per year or some ridiculous number, and then cantilevering out both sides and making it like the Golden Arch in St. Louis, really like a place where that connected Kansas City to Missouri, and like it was going to be a wedding venue and all these cool things. And they have a whole rendering of everything up on their website. It's called the Rock Island Bridge. And yeah, I'm one of the owners of it. I'm an owner of the Rock Island Bridge. And when it gets eventually built, I think it's supposed to start at the end of this year, or the beginning of next. I'm actually going to have these guys on my podcast when they get back from Ireland. But yeah, it's super cool. I thought the project was something that I never had heard about, never had seen it. And I was like, I just want to be a part of this. Like, I want to be a part of this network. I want to be a part of this deal. And, myself, as somebody who I feel is the best steward of my own money, it wasn't about the money that I invested. It was the project and the people that I invested in. And the upside was, if the investment goes well, I'll do great, and
Yeah.
it's up to me to what I do with the rest of the stuff.
Cool. All right. Well, going back to your original question on syndications, and your bridge example is a good example of it. Certainly, the multifamily deals I do are good examples of it. But picture a syndication as just being a group of people for a common interest. And in this case, we're talking about real estate, providing returns, creating something, and everyone pitches in a certain amount of money, they own a percentage of the deal. And typically the people that are doing like your investors, they're passive investors or limited partners. And so they invest the money, but they really don't have to do anything else. Now your GP, which is the general partner, and sometimes there's multiple general partners, but those are the people that are kind of in charge of the entire project. They're like the quarterback of the project. So they'll find the deal, they find the brokers to work with, they get the financing lined up, they purchase the property, they'll manage the property, hire the general contractors, hire property managers, refinance the property, decide when to sell it. Like that whole overarching plan is like quarterbacked by the general partnership team. And so that's where you have GPs and LPs that are part of the syndication. And typically they'll create a business entity, and it's usually an LLC that they'll create that holds title to that property. And everyone owns a percentage of it depending on how much money they put into the deal.
So it really sounds like it's like a fund, right? It's actually just a small fund is what a syndication is. And there's different types of those funds. And there's what, 506A, 506B. Can you speak intelligently about both of those?
It's it is different than a fund. And just to clarify, so typically a fund is you're putting money into a fund to buy certain properties. And so you'll know ahead of time. I'm actually starting a fund in St. Petersburg, Florida. We're doing a $5 million raise, and we'll probably purchase, $12 to $15 million worth of property. So in that example, we tell people, hey, we're buying properties that kind of look like this. We're expecting to do these sort of plans with it, but you don't know what the property is. So you put your money into the fund, and then the fund goes out and purchases those things. That is quite a bit different than a property specific deal, like what you did with the bridge, or I do with my other Tallahassee deal I'm doing right now. We're buying a 152 unit building in Tallahassee. And so like people that are investing in that, they know that they're investing just in this one project. You invested only in that bridge. The people that invest in the fund, they don't know exactly what properties they're investing in. They just kind of know the overall business plan. So those are kind of how those differences are. When it comes to the 506 SEC filings, so there's an exemption under the SEC code, securities code, that allows you to offer a property or a security without registering it officially through the SEC. And those are exemptions. And Section 506 has several different exemptions that allow you to not have to go through the $100,000 registration process with the SEC. And those are done through a private placement memorandum, but it's registered as an exemption with the SEC. So your 506Bs, like that's what I'm doing for Tallahassee. So I'm not allowed to publicly advertise for my Tallahassee deal. You won't see any information out on the internet on that, nowhere on my social media. It's very private. If I have an existing relationship with somebody, then I can talk to them about it. Now 506C is for accredited investors only, and you're allowed to advertise publicly for that, but you need to be an accredited investor. On the 506B, you can be an accredited investor, although you don't have to be. You could be what they call a sophisticated investor, which means you have some sort of investment experience and you have a pre-existing relationship with the general partner, and then you can bring those people on in that type of offering.
Well, I think that's a great explanation, and thank you for kind of correcting me on the fund. I've always just, sometimes things in my mind make more sense if I just associate them that way, because when you start a real estate, I guess the way I look at it is when you do a syndication, you are basically almost starting a fund, except for, like you said, you've identified which property is the only property. Now, could you pull off of that if you started a syndication, let's say on your Tallahassee property, and you like everybody in there, could that then become a fund?
No, it wouldn't, because that would be two different types of offerings. So it's like a 100-page document. These private placement memorandums, they're very long. They contain a subscription agreement, operating agreement, private placement memorandum. It's all contained in that document. Very, like I said, 100 or 100 plus page document, and it's only for that security offering. So you're only allowed to, and it's written that way so that there's not confusion with investors. Like, you're telling investors, hey, we're only going to be investing in this property, and it's listed in that PPM. The fund, if you want to do a fund, it's a separate offering, a separate registration with the SEC and Securities and Exchange Commission. That's what I was trying to remember before. But you're doing a separate offering, and it's registered with the SEC separately. So there really isn't any way that you'd be able to kind of change direction, change course after you've already done something, because it typically wouldn't be allowed through the PPM.
Cool. That's a great answer, Chad. I totally appreciate you spelling it out for us. You're definitely a smart guy. So what kind of properties are you investing in right now? And what kind of deals could other people like partner with you if they wanted to? And how would they get a hold of you? This is a good chance for you to plug all your social medias.
Cool. Yeah. So we're still investing in California, primarily in Long Beach. I do have other properties that I own here, but right now I'm most active in Long Beach. And so that, and it's weird. Like, some people really only want to invest in California, and some people only want to invest out of California. For me, I had a lot of investments in California, and I wanted to diversify out a bit. And a lot of my investors want to do the same thing. So that's why we're doing these active syndications out of state right now. And so, like I mentioned, I'm doing the deal in Tallahassee. I've got two deals, which are going to be a part of a fund in St. Petersburg, Tampa, St. Petersburg area. And then the Long Beach ones are just separate. So we do have quite a bit going on. Anyone who's interested, they can find out more information at csqproperties.com. I've got a YouTube channel with videos out there. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram as well. I'm not on TikTok yet, but after talking with you, I think I might have to start doing some TikTok stuff. Last thing is email is info@csqproperties.com.
I would totally definitely, if you guys are interested in hearing what Chad has to say, he's probably one of the smartest guys I've met in a long time. I mean, and that's why we go to these conferences and stuff, is not just for the information that's there, but to meet the network of people. And, it's about the relationships that you build afterwards and the amount of information that you share, because like, I learned a ton about syndication today just from talking to you, because you're explaining it differently than it's been explained to me before. And I've been to a lot of conferences and this and that, but when you're actually talking to somebody who's doing it, right, who's actually involved in it and understanding that, man, it is basically a good preparation tool for starting a fund or for starting something that bigger. If you want to take your company public down the road, like, you're actually going through and you're hiring lawyers. The other thing I wanted to touch base on that I don't think we touched base on, one of the things that GPs also do sometimes is they sign on the debt.
Yeah. That's a really big part of it. So the GP, somebody on the GP team has to sign on the debt. And even if it's a non-recourse loan, the banks still want to know who's they call it the key principal in the deal. And these requirements change all the time. It's different from bank to bank. It's different week to week. It's always changing. But typically there's somebody who is signing on the debt, and they got to have a strong balance sheet. They got to have strong liquidity so that they can satisfy those bank requirements. That's certainly a really big part of the deal. Now going back to what we said, like, hey, why syndication or funds? Like, a lot of times investors aren't able to get into these larger deals because, one, they don't want to put all their eggs in one basket, and two, they don't really know what they're doing anyway. So they find a general partner or a syndicator that they know, like, and trust, and then they give a part of their money into that investment. And I've got a lot of investors that just invest in every single deal. So, like, they could have put all their eggs in one basket on one deal, but they want to really diversify themselves as well. So they do, maybe 100 grand in each deal. And now they're spread out, they got a portfolio that's spread out over a bunch of different properties.
And how do they get paid?
So when I mentioned earlier that they own part of that LLC, and this is the real benefit of it, right? This is why investors invest in real estate through syndications. So they'll own a percentage of typically what's an LLC. And when you own a percentage of that, you get a percentage of all the cash flows from that. You get a percentage of all the depreciation losses that can go against that cash flow. And then when you sell it, you get your percentage of all the upside. And so all those different cash flow streams are why they get to do it. But just as important as the cash flow stream is the depreciation loss that you also get. It's given via like typically a K1. I'm not an accountant, but this is how I've seen it. You can check with your accountant for your situation, or anything legal I've said too. Check with them too. But
sure. That goes for me as well.
Yeah, you typically can get your depreciation losses and your passive income gains, and that's all flowed directly through you via a K1 that's a tax form that you got to file.
So you're speaking at a pretty high level. A lot of our audience, I think we should probably do a part 2 on this thing, because we're really getting into it, and I like it. I like where this thing's going, and I know that we're pressed for time a little bit. So I did want to one of the things I always like to do with our audience is offer inspiration, right? And definitely, if you guys are listening right now, give Chad a 5-star review. He's really sharing everything with you, which is super, super important. And definitely follow him on all his socials, and have him do some TikToks and breaking down some of the cool things that he just talked about right there in 60 seconds, because I want to see you get on that thing. It'll be awesome for you. I mean, you got such a big brain, and you sharing all that information with everybody is just going to make you go viral. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, like, if you were talking to the young Chad who didn't know as much as the old Chad, what would you be telling that guy right now to inspire him, to get him to become a multimillionaire like you are right now, to get him to become super successful? What would you tell, or people who are out there listening who are like, they've kind of got that defeatist mentality, or maybe they're trying to get started and they don't know where to start? What would you tell them?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think there's a lot to learn from us older guys that have kind of gone through the school hard knocks. And actually, Troy, I think you're pretty similar to me. Like I think I always wanted to do everything myself. I work really hard. I've got 3 master's degrees. Like I've done a lot of schooling, and I've kind of wanted to do everything myself. And it was almost like my Achilles heel was, if you want to get it done right, you got to do it yourself, right? And the problem with that is it holds you back. And if I had to go back in time to myself 20 years ago, I would be focusing a lot more on networking and partnerships. And that's something I'm doing a lot more today. And I didn't do it as much earlier on. I wanted to do everything myself. And in my path, I've learned a lot, which is good. And I've got a lot of experience, but it came at a cost of a lot of my self-sacrifice. And also just taking longer to get to where I am now. I think I could have compressed that time frame if I would have networked more and focused on partnerships. And like for me, I just signed up for my first mentorship group. I joined the Real Estate Guys Inner Circle, and it's like I'm 46 years old, and I finally just got a mentor, and it's like, oh man, why did I do something like this so long ago? I could have really compressed time frames. I invested in education, but you can invest in other parts of you that probably could have had a little bit better results had I done them earlier.
I think that's great advice. And I think that, like, if we could always go back in time, we always see clearer. But the fact that the other thing I think to jump on top of that is, like, it's never too late, right? You're 46 and I I'm 44, and I see, like, my best years are ahead of me. They're not behind me. I feel like my best, the time to celebrate my children and the legacy that I'm creating right now is in front of me. It's not behind me. And if you're looking at life that way, and I just had a podcast the other day with Stacey Gray, and we were kind of talking about that too, is in terms of how you process things. A lot of people process things like, hey, there's always a problem. There's always this way. If you process things, there's always a benefit. There's always this way. It's how your mindset and your shift and everything like that, Chad. I think that's great advice. Is there anything else that you would say to people, like besides getting a mentor and you know, and partnering with other people, like in terms of like if they feel defeated and they've lost money on deals and they don't want to get back into the game?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've all been there for sure. You know, one of the things that one of the lines I always like to hear is that everybody who is at the front of the line was once at the back of the line. You know,
Yeah.
and it's excuse me, it's really easy to kind of look at somebody and say, "Oh my gosh, they're so amazing, they're lucky, they have everything," and blah blah blah. And it's like, I guarantee you, there was a time in their life when they were hanging on the side of a mountain and just hanging on for dear life and thinking like, "Man, I don't know if I can keep going." And
Right.
and it's like it's always you know, most people quit right before they make it. You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
you got to stick in there. And social media. One of the negatives about it is everyone typically presents their best self on social media. In actuality, we all have ups and downs, and a lot of us, especially, you know, the more successful ones, we've had some serious downturns, and and you don't see that all the time in social media. But you got to know that you're not the only person that's struggling. You're not the only person who wants to give up. You're not the only person that just feels like throwing in the towel. We've all been there, and you just got to persevere and stick through it.
Man, that is great advice. I'm getting goosebumps just hearing it. It's really, I mean, because it brings me back to one of my favorite books, which is written by Napoleon Hill in 1937, called Think and Grow Rich. And he talks about that little analogy there is like, you know, this one guy chipping away at this mine and he quits.
Yeah.
He goes and he sells the mine and he moves back to town and he sells it for like $1. And the guy goes and hires an engineer, civil engineer like yourself. And they found out that the guy stopped 3 feet from the biggest gold vein ever that had ever been discovered. Right.
Yeah.
And then he said, I stopped 3 feet from gold once and I'll never stop again. But the other thing on top of that I learned the hard way, having owned a towing business that I just recently sold, is sometimes you got to know when to quit too. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you listen to Steve Jobs, and he attributes as much of his success to all the things he said no to as to what he said yes to. And especially when you're getting pulled in a lot of different directions, sometimes focus is what really can help you become successful. And it's really easy for us to get pulled in so many different directions that you really got to know what to say no to and focus. And that's where like a coach or mentor can really come in handy. And certainly like your book, which I've got to read. I saw a lot of promo on it when I was looking online. You know, talking to people like you that have been there and reaching out and helping people are great ways that you can kind of shortcut the amount of time it takes you to get to where you want to get to.
Well, I think that's a great idea. In fact, I do have a coaching program, so we'll put the link up on there. And it's something that we're offering for people who are looking to get into real estate investing. Obviously, we're not doing syndication, but that would be something certainly that I would be interested in talking to you about in terms of if you're ever looking to offer those services on helping people get into syndication and stuff like that. I don't teach what I don't know how to do. So obviously I'm not one of those guys like, hey, I'll sell it. I don't know how to do it. Right. And
Yeah.
I really appreciated you coming on the show, Chad. I really appreciate you sharing all your wisdom, the 46 years of your life, your frustrations, your battles, the patrioticness that you share with your family, that you share with us. And I'd love to have you come back and let's take a deeper dive into the syndication and like how to structure one of those things and maybe have an attorney on or something like that. Cause I think it's really, really beneficial for people to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy to do that. And thanks for helping to get all the education out. You're doing an awesome thing for a lot of people.
Well, I appreciate you saying that and we'll check you later. Peace.